A woman tried to citizen arrest someone parked in their own driveway. Turns out that someone was the county sheriff. It started with a golf cart, a voice, and a whole lot of assumptions. Danielle Carter had just pulled into her driveway in Winder, Georgia, a quiet, mostly white neighborhood about 45 minutes outside of Athens. Her hands were still on the steering wheel when she spotted the cart in her rearview mirror. It was coming fast, weaving around trash cans like it had somewhere important to be. She sighed. Not today. The sun was low, casting orange light across the cul-de-sac. Her 15-year-old daughter, Ava, had just texted her, "You want me to start dinner?" Danielle was about to reply when the golf cart skidded to a stop behind her SUV, blocking her in. Out stepped a woman with cropped blonde hair, sunglasses pushed high on her forehead, and a clipboard under one arm like it was part of her body. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She walked up like she was the sheriff in town, which was ironic. Danielle cracked her window, keeping her tone polite. "Can I help you?" The woman didn't even introduce herself. "You can't park here. This is private property." Danielle blinked. "I live here." The woman's eyes narrowed like that answer didn't make sense. "Whose house is this?" Danielle glanced toward the porch. "Mine." A pause. Not a thoughtful one, an offended one. "I don't think so," the woman said. "I've lived on this street for 16 years. I know who belongs here." Danielle gave a patient smile. "Then you should know I moved in 7 months ago. Danielle Carter." But the woman didn't react like someone who just made an honest mistake. She reacted like someone doubling down. "ID, please," she said. "I'm on the HOA board. You could be trespassing." Danielle's fingers curled around her phone. "I don't need to show you anything, ma'am. Again, I live here." The woman stepped closer. "If you don't cooperate, I'm calling the police. I have every right to detain someone I believe is committing a crime. This is a citizen's arrest." Danielle laughed under her breath. Not because it was funny, but because this woman was dead serious. "Are you detaining all your neighbors today, or just the black ones?" That's when the woman puffed up like she'd been insulted. "Don't pull that card. This has nothing to do with race. It has to do with suspicious behavior and trespassing." Danielle leaned back, staring at the ceiling of her car. She'd worked 12 hours straight, domestic call, car chase, paperwork, now this. The woman, she still hadn't said her name, raised her phone. "I'm calling Barrow County right now." Danielle looked her in the eye. "You really don't want to do that." "Why not? You afraid they'll find something in that car?" Danielle reached over to the passenger seat and grabbed her wallet. Slowly, no sudden moves. She opened it and held it up to the window. Badge, photo ID, Barrow County Sheriff's Office. The woman froze like the air had just been sucked out of the street. "I am Barrow County," Danielle said. "Now get your golf cart off my property." But just as the woman started backing up, a few porch lights blinked on, and neighbors began stepping outside, phones in hand. It wasn't just about Danielle and the woman anymore. It was about everyone who had just seen what happened and what they were going to do next. Danielle Carter didn't look like what people expected when they heard sheriff, and that's exactly how she liked it. At 38, she had a quiet confidence about her, the kind built over years of walking into tense rooms and walking back out without raising her voice. She didn't carry herself like someone who needed to prove anything. She let facts do the talking. Born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, Danielle grew up knowing two things. People would judge her before they knew her, and she couldn't let that stop her. Her mother was a nurse, her father worked maintenance at the local school district, and neither of them ever let her forget how much harder she'd have to work just to be seen as equal. She chose law enforcement because she believed in accountability, not just for citizens, but for the system itself. She wasn't naive. She knew what people whispered when a black woman showed up at a crime scene with a badge, but she also knew how to hold the room without raising her voice. That was her gift. Danielle didn't like the spotlight. Never had. She was the kind of person who quietly sponsored kids' sports teams, remembered her neighbors' birthdays, and took food over to the elderly woman 2 doors down when it was storming. She didn't post about it. She didn't want applause. She just believed in doing right, especially when no one was looking. Her move to Winder, Georgia, had been about space, a fresh start. After her divorce, she wanted Ava to have peace, a backyard, safe streets, good schools. She'd found a house on a quiet cul-de-sac that felt right. Nothing fancy, but clean, safe, and surrounded by azaleas that bloomed like clockwork. The neighborhood had been mostly polite, though distant. Some neighbors waved, some didn't. A few brought cookies that first week. Others watched her from behind curtains. She noticed it all. But she didn't let it shape how she lived. Not until today. And Ava, smart, funny, a little shy, was finally settling in. She'd joined the school's robotics team. Danielle was proud, but she also worried. About the way Ava's voice changed when she talked to certain teachers. About the way she checked her hoodie before leaving the house. About the things you learn to do before the world teaches you why. Danielle had spent the whole day on her feet. 2 theft cases, 1 missing persons lead, and a late-night call about a domestic dispute that ended with her standing in the rain for an hour, talking a woman out of pressing charges. So when she turned onto her own street, her mind had already started shutting down. She was thinking about dinner, about Ava's science project, about laundry. She wasn't prepared for a golf cart chase and a woman with a clipboard acting like Judge Judy, but that was the thing about people like her neighbor. They didn't see a tired mom, or a public servant, or a human being. They saw a threat. And as Danielle sat in that car, staring at the woman still standing outside with her mouth slightly open, it hit her all over again. There are some people who don't need a reason to distrust you. They just need a story they've already told themselves. But before Danielle could even put the SUV in park and step out to reclaim her evening, she noticed something else. The neighbor across the street had started filming, and the woman in the golf cart didn't seem fazed by it at all. That meant one thing: this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Margaret Whitlow didn't believe she was wrong. Not then, not ever. She stood 5'4", but made herself feel taller by standing on principle, even when her principles made no sense. Her father had been a Marine, her mother a piano teacher, and somewhere between those 2 legacies, Margaret had built an identity around order. Rules were rules, and she was their enforcer. To her, Danielle wasn't a neighbor. She was an unknown vehicle, an unfamiliar face, and that was enough to trigger the mental checklist Margaret carried around in her head. The one with boxes labeled "doesn't belong," "looks suspicious," "doesn't follow the rules." Never mind that Danielle's SUV was parked in her own driveway. Never mind that her name was on the mailbox. Margaret didn't recognize her, and that was enough. She took a step forward again, despite having just seen the badge. "That could be fake, you know. Shukisum," she said, pointing at Danielle's wallet. "I've seen scams like that on the news." Danielle tilted her head, almost amused. "You're serious?" "I'm dead serious," Margaret replied. "Anyone can print a badge these days. You could be impersonating law enforcement. It wouldn't be the first time." Danielle opened her door slowly and stepped out, still calm, still collected. "You want to call dispatch? Go ahead. Ask for me by name." Margaret didn't budge. "I don't have to call anyone. I have authority here." "You're not law enforcement," Danielle said. "You're an HOA board member. That's not the same thing." Margaret crossed her arms. "We're responsible for keeping this neighborhood safe, and you're not above the rules just because you have a shiny badge." Danielle looked around. More neighbors now. A few in pajamas, a couple still in office clothes, phones up, recording, nobody stepping in, just watching. Ava cracked open the front door. "Mom?" Her voice floated out. "Back inside, baby," Danielle said without turning around. "Lock the door. I'll be in soon." Margaret's eyes flicked toward the house. "That your daughter?" Danielle didn't answer. She didn't have to. "You bringing kids into this neighborhood too?" Margaret muttered, just loud enough for Danielle to hear. Danielle took one step closer, calm, measured. "Watch your tone." That was when a new voice chimed in from across the lawn. "Hey, Margaret, maybe let it go." It was Walter Dunn, a retired mechanic who lived 3 doors down. Big guy, always wore the same camo baseball cap. He'd been standing with his arms crossed, watching the whole thing. His wife, Beatrice, stood next to him, frowning. Margaret turned. "This doesn't concern you, Walt." "It does now," he said. "You're yelling at a homeowner in her own driveway, and she's a sheriff. What exactly are you trying to prove?" Margaret scoffed. "I'm trying to keep our streets safe." "From who?" Beatrice said sharply. "From a black woman in her driveway?" Margaret's mouth fell open, scandalized. "I never said that." "You didn't have to," Beatrice shot back. Danielle stayed silent, watching it unfold like a spectator at her own trial. Margaret looked around. The crowd wasn't on her side anymore. She could feel it. That shift, the stares, the judgment. But instead of backing off, she dug in harder. "I've worked too hard to keep this place nice," she said, "and I won't apologize for asking questions." "You didn't ask," Danielle said quietly. "You accused." Margaret flinched. Danielle continued, "You blocked my car. You threatened to call the police. You tried to detain me in front of my child. And now you're pretending this is about safety?" Margaret didn't respond. Her mouth opened like she had something to say, but nothing came out. Walter spoke again. "It's time to go home, Margaret." Margaret stood for a moment, caught between defiance and embarrassment. Then slowly she turned back toward her golf cart. But she wasn't done. Not yet. She pulled out her phone again and took a picture of Danielle's license plate. Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Documentation," Margaret snapped. But before she could climb into her cart, another neighbor stepped forward. Someone no one expected to speak. And what he said would flip the temperature of the street yet again. The man who stepped forward was Julian Park, mid-40s, lived at the end of the cul-de-sac, always polite, always quiet. He was Korean-American, worked in IT, had a wife and a son in middle school. The kind of guy who waved from his driveway but never lingered long enough for real conversation. So when Julian raised his voice, everyone took notice. "That's enough, Margaret," he said, not loud, not angry, just firm. "This isn't right." Margaret turned to him like she'd been betrayed. "Julian, are you serious?" He nodded. "I am. You're embarrassing yourself. And the rest of us." Margaret looked around again, hoping to find at least one face that would back her up. But most people were frozen, watching, unsure, afraid to pick a side out loud. A few people were still filming. One neighbor whispered something to her husband and pulled him back inside. Danielle glanced down at her phone. She hadn't moved since stepping out of the SUV. Her hands were steady, but her jaw was tight. She didn't want this, any of it. She just wanted to go inside, put her feet up, eat something that didn't come from a vending machine, and talk to her daughter. So she tried one more time. "Look," she said, keeping her voice even. "I don't want to press charges. I don't want drama. I don't even want an apology. I just want to be left alone in my own driveway after work. Can we do that?" Margaret didn't answer. Her pride was choking her. Danielle added, "I've seen how situations like this go. You think you're doing your civic duty. You don't realize you're turning into the problem." Margaret's fingers gripped her phone tighter. "You think I'm the problem? You're standing in my driveway still trying to prove I don't belong here, even after being told, by me and by 3 neighbors, that I do," Danielle said. "You're on camera. You're being recorded, and you still haven't taken one step back. So, yeah, you're the problem right now." Margaret's face flushed red. But before she could respond, Julian cut in again. "Danielle," he said softly, "do you want me to walk Ava over to our place? She doesn't need to see all this." Danielle thought about it, then shook her head. "Thank you, but no, she's stronger than she looks." From behind the window, Ava had been peeking through the blinds, watching everything. That thought hit Danielle hard, harder than she expected. Her daughter was watching her mother get treated like a stranger in her own home, like a suspect, and she knew this wouldn't be the last time. Still, Danielle tried to de-escalate, because she knew where this kind of confrontation could lead. It only took one wrong word, one gesture misread, one officer showing up on the wrong side of the truth. She walked a few steps toward Margaret, not threatening, just closing the distance. "I'm giving you a chance to walk away, because I know what happens when people don't. You may think this is your neighborhood, but I'm your neighbor, whether you like it or not." Margaret's eyes flickered, to the crowd, to the badge, to the phone cameras. And then something shifted in her expression. Not remorse, not understanding, just fear. Not the kind you feel when you're in danger, the kind you feel when you realize you might no longer be in control. She climbed into her golf cart, but even then, she muttered under her breath, "This used to be a decent street." Danielle heard her. "So make it decent again," she said. "Start by respecting the people who live on it." The golf cart backed up slowly, tires crunching against the edge of the driveway. Margaret turned without another word and drove off. Danielle stood still for a moment, letting the tension fall off her shoulders like sweat. She glanced around. The crowd had mostly thinned. A few neighbors waved awkwardly. Some just went back inside. But one woman, tall, black, maybe mid-50s, whom Danielle hadn't met yet, walked up with a small nod. "Sheriff," she said, "I've lived here 8 years. You ever need anything, we're 2 doors down. I'm Charlene." Danielle smiled. "Thank you, good to know." But before Charlene could say more, the flashing red and blue lights appeared around the corner, slow, deliberate. Someone had still called the cops, and now Danielle had to decide, let it go, or make it clear who she was, loud enough for the whole county to hear. The squad car rolled to a stop just past Danielle's driveway, lights still flashing, engine idling. Inside were 2 deputies, young, unfamiliar. She didn't recognize either of them. They looked confused, scanning the street, then focusing on the woman in uniform standing beside a black SUV. Danielle crossed her arms and waited. Calm on the outside, but inside, she was calculating. She knew how this could go. She'd been on both sides, responding to calls where people lied, escalated, or tried to play the hero. This was no different. She just happened to be standing in her own driveway instead of someone else's. The passenger door opened. Deputy 1 stepped out, resting his hand near his holster. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "we got a report of a suspicious individual refusing to identify themselves. Can you step back from the vehicle, please?" Danielle didn't move. "What's your name, deputy?" He blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," she said. "Name and badge number." The deputy glanced at his partner, now stepping out of the driver's side. His partner leaned forward slightly, noticing Danielle's uniform. The pressed shirt, the dark blue pants, the radio clipped to her belt. "Wait," the second deputy said, voice lowering. "You're Sheriff Danielle Carter," she said, loud enough for the remaining neighbors to hear. "Badge number 23604. You're standing in my driveway." Both deputies froze. Deputy 1 looked visibly embarrassed now. We weren't given that information." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "You mean the caller didn't mention she was trying to detain a sitting county sheriff in front of her own home?" The second deputy stepped forward quickly. "Sheriff Carter, our apologies. We weren't aware." "I'm aware," Danielle interrupted. "That's the problem. And now you are too." Behind her, Ava had come back to the front door. Her face showed no fear, just quiet confusion, like she was trying to put together what it meant to watch your mother have to explain her authority to people wearing the same badge. Deputy 1 tried to reset. "Is there anything you want us to do here? A report? Documentation?" Danielle stared at them both for a moment. She could have said yes. She could have made this a formal complaint, called in body cams, written statements. But she also knew how this would ripple through the department. The gossip, the whispers, the new label she'd get from some of her own officers. Troublemaker. So she said, "No, you've got your call log. That's enough paper trail for now." The deputies nodded, relieved. Too relieved. As they turned back toward their car, Danielle added, "Tell dispatch next time to vet their calls better. I shouldn't have to prove my identity in my own driveway." Deputy 2 looked back, apologetic. "Understood, Sheriff." The squad car pulled away. Charlene, still standing at the edge of the sidewalk, let out a soft whistle. "Phew, you handled that better than I would have." Danielle gave a half smile. "You get used to it." Charlene tilted her head. "That's the part that stings, though, ain't it? That you have to." Danielle didn't answer, not right away. She walked back toward her SUV, opened the driver's door, and paused, hand on the frame. Her voice was low, mostly to herself, but Charlene heard it. "It's not that I get used to it, it's that I refuse to let it make me smaller." Charlene nodded. "Then you're doing something right." But even as the blue lights disappeared down the road, Danielle knew this wasn't over. Not really. Margaret wasn't the type to learn quietly, and by morning, the entire neighborhood would have an opinion. Some loud, some silent, but all impossible to ignore. The next morning, the neighborhood wasn't quiet, not in the way it had been before. It started with a whisper on the Nextdoor app. Then came the Facebook post, a photo of Danielle standing beside her SUV, taken from across the street, with a caption that read, "So the woman I accused of trespassing turned out to be the county sheriff. Guess we all make mistakes." It didn't say who wrote it, but everyone knew. By noon, the post had over 150 comments. Most were polite, some were supportive, But a surprising number danced around the obvious. She didn't need to be so aggressive with Margaret. It's a misunderstanding. No need to make it racial. I've never seen her before either. Danielle read the comments in silence. She wasn't surprised. The ones who said nothing spoke the loudest. The ones she thought were different. The ones who'd dropped off banana bread or waved from their lawns were nowhere to be found, except for a few. Walter and Beatrice dropped off a casserole that evening. Julian sent Ava a message about tutoring her son in math, just casually, like nothing had happened. Charlene stopped by with a book and didn't say a word about the incident. She just hugged Danielle and said, "You were seen, loud and clear." But for every kind gesture, there was a cold stare on the street, an awkward silence at the mailbox, a neighbor turning around the moment Danielle stepped out to walk the dog. Nothing overt, just enough to notice, just enough to feel. Ava felt it too. At school, her friend Eliza asked, "Why was your mom on Facebook?" And someone else joked, "Guess y'all own the whole street now, huh?" Danielle had prepared her daughter for a lot of things, but not this. Not the experience of being turned into a headline, a post, a story that people felt entitled to twist. That night, Ava sat at the kitchen table, staring at a math worksheet she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. "You okay?" Danielle asked. Ava shrugged. "I'm fine." "You're not." Ava looked up. "Why did she do that?" Danielle paused before answering. "Because some people think if they don't recognize you, you don't belong." "That's dumb." "It is," Danielle said, "but that doesn't stop them from believing it." Ava set her pencil down. "Are you mad?" Danielle thought about it, then nodded. "Yeah, I am. Not because it happened, but because it keeps happening." Ava's eyes searched her mother's face. "Are we going to move?" Danielle leaned forward. "Do you want to move?" Ava shook her head. "No, I like our house. I like our yard. I like our life." Danielle smiled. "Then we stay." There was a moment of silence between them, heavy but steady. Then Ava asked, "What do you think she's going to do?" "Margaret," Danielle said, "she'll either double down or disappear." But Margaret didn't disappear. The next day, a letter showed up in Danielle's mailbox. No return address, printed on HOA letterhead. It read, "As a result of recent events, we will be revisiting our neighborhood watch protocols. All residents are encouraged to report unfamiliar activity. Safety comes first." No apology, no responsibility, just a quiet doubling down. Danielle folded the paper in half and placed it in a drawer. She didn't need to respond. Not in writing. She already had her answer. Because later that same day, while Ava was in the backyard, Danielle walked down the street and stopped in front of Margaret's house. She didn't knock. She didn't threaten. She just stood there for a moment, made sure she was seen. Not angry, not small, just present. And from behind the curtain, Margaret watched, phone in hand, unsure what to do now that the roles were reversed. But Danielle didn't need to say a word. She'd already spoken, with her presence, her patience, and her refusal to be erased. Still, what came next would test her resolve even more. 2 weeks passed. No more golf carts, no more shouting in the driveway, just clipped hedges, tight smiles, and a neighborhood pretending to be what it wasn't. Comfortable. But things had changed. Danielle felt it. At the monthly HOA meeting, usually quiet, half-attended, full of snacks and passive-aggressive energy, every chair was filled. Margaret sat at the front, rigid and quiet, flipping through the meeting agenda like it was a shield. She hadn't spoken to Danielle since the driveway incident, not once, not even when they made eye contact during recycling day. Danielle didn't plan to say anything either, but then someone brought it up. "We've had a lot of attention lately," said Craig Holman, the HOA president, middle-aged, khakis, and a nervous smile. "Some unwanted, some eye-opening." There were murmurs. Most avoided looking at Danielle, except for Charlene and Julian, who sat behind her like silent reinforcements. "We just want to make sure the neighborhood feels safe. For everyone," Craig added carefully. Danielle didn't raise her hand. She stood up. "I agree," she said, steady. "Safety should never be an excuse to harass your neighbors, especially when your neighbors wear the same badge as the officers you'd call." The room got quiet. Dead quiet. I didn't move here to make waves, she continued. I moved here to raise my daughter in peace. But what happened in my driveway wasn't peace. It was a reminder that no matter how hard I've worked, what uniform I wear, or where I lay my head, to some people, I'll always be a question mark. Craig cleared his throat. We understand. And, we're sorry. Danielle nodded once. Then show it. Change how you talk about safety. Stop treating unfamiliar as a threat. And maybe stop calling the cops before knocking on someone's door like a decent human being. A couple of people clapped, not many, but enough. Margaret didn't move, didn't speak, but her jaw tightened. After the meeting, Charlene caught up with Danielle in the parking lot. You think she learned anything? Danielle shrugged. Not my job to teach her. Charlene smiled. Still, you taught the rest of them something. That weekend, something unexpected happened. A group of teenagers from the neighborhood knocked on Danielle's door. Ava opened it. 3 girls stood there holding a sign that read, "We're glad you're our neighbor." Ava blinked. Wait, what? One girl stepped forward. We made it for your mom. We're in the same grade as you. I think we have lunch at the same table. Ava smiled, a little shy, a little surprised. You do? Danielle came to the door, read the sign, looked at the girls, all of them barely 15, maybe 16. Thank you, she said. That means more than you know. Small gestures, but sometimes that's all it takes. Later that night, Danielle sat on the porch, Ava beside her, both quiet, crickets chirping. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed its last few turns. Do you still think we're staying? Ava asked. Danielle didn't even hesitate. We're staying, Ava nodded. Good. They sat there a while longer, just breathing, just being. Then Danielle said something she hadn't told anyone, not even Charlene. I didn't handle that situation because I'm the sheriff, she said. I handled it because I'm your mom. And no one gets to make you feel like you don't belong. Ava leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. I'm proud of you, she said. Danielle smiled. I'm proud of us. But even as peace returned to the street, Danielle knew this moment would stay with them forever. Not as a scar, but as a lesson. One they'd carry into every new day, one porch at a time. Weeks later, the neighborhood looked the same. Kids rode bikes, sprinklers ticked in the evenings, trash cans rolled to the curb on Tuesdays like clockwork. But something was different, even if it was subtle. People waved a little more, slowed down when they passed Danielle's house, some out of guilt, some out of respect, a few out of curiosity. Either way, the silence had broken. What was once ignored had now been seen, and seen can't be unseen. Danielle didn't need Margaret to say she was sorry. She already knew she wasn't getting that. Some people don't apologize. They just avoid you louder. And that was fine. Danielle wasn't looking for validation. What she wanted, what she taught that day, was simple. You don't have to explain your right to exist. Not in your home, not in your neighborhood, not anywhere. Being calm doesn't mean being weak. Choosing patience doesn't mean accepting disrespect. Sometimes, standing in silence does more than yelling ever could. Danielle could have snapped, could have thrown the badge in Margaret's face the second the argument started, but she didn't. She let Margaret show the world exactly who she was. No help needed. Ava saw all of it. And that was the part that mattered most. Because now, when Ava sits in class and hears someone make a comment that doesn't sit right, when she walks through a store and notices who gets followed and who doesn't, when she grows into a young woman in a world still stacked with quiet judgments and loud silences, she'll remember how her mom handled that day, with strength, with dignity, with facts, and most importantly, without letting someone else shrink her. So if you're watching this right now and you've ever been made to feel like you had to prove yourself just to be treated like a person, this story is for you. If you've ever held your breath when the police lights flicked on behind you, if you've ever been told to calm down when you were already being calm, if you've ever been looked at like you didn't fit when all you did was show up, just know you're not imagining it. You're not alone, and you don't owe anyone your silence. Stand your ground, live out loud, be the lesson,